Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your host, Phil Hawkins.
And Asai Calderon Muñiz.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Today's a little bit different, a little bit weird. We're not going to be talking about the MCAT. I know that doesn't make any sense. It's the MCAT podcast. But I think that a lot of times students get this hyper tunnel vision and they just see the MCAT. Like, as long as I do well on my MCAT, I'll get into med school. But there's a lot of other stuff going on with this. And we have a special guest today, Nicole Sam, who I've worked with for quite a while at this point. We're old friends. And she has a ton of insight into I want to say the back half, but really like the back like 90% of the application process. If the MCAT's just taking the MCAT's the first 10%, there's a lot of things that come after this: personal statements, letters of recommendation, secondaries, interviews, school selection, scholarships for med school. Like, that's actually a thing that I think a lot of students don't realize. And so I'm super excited to talk to Nicole and maybe get some insight into the process a little bit deeper.
Super excited to have you, Nicole. You are a wealth of wisdom, and all of our listeners are super just lucky and blessed to get to hear what you have to say today. And that's why we absolutely needed to have you here with us.
Thank you both so much. I'm humbled by that introduction, and I really appreciate you having me here today, because I know that what you all do is so important with the prep for the MCAT and guidance on how to navigate that process. And while that is a huge part of the application process and really opening the door, there's so much more that goes behind getting into med school. And that's where we come in. I am the director of the admission services here at Jack Westin. And through our program and just through an understanding of admissions overall, we are here to help you gain the background of, like Phil said, the backbone and the behind the scenes parts of getting into med school. And today's going to be a great chance for us to talk about just applying to med school overall, changes to the application process, and any updates and information that would be helpful for all of you to have as you're kind of thinking about moving past the process of MCAT prep and transitioning into admissions and moving forward with your application.
Yeah, I feel like we should start with the admissions side of things, of just like things have changed. Like every year, like every once in a while, something will change with the admissions process. And I know that there were a couple of changes that you were talking to me about earlier. I'm like, oh, I just wasn't even aware of this. And so I think there's a good chance a lot of students might not be aware of this. And so like figuring this out, like what's changing in the process of applying to med school is a big thing to be paying attention to.
Yes, definitely. And I think this year has a couple of the more significant changes that we've seen in a little while. We saw a lot of changes in 2020 because of COVID and the pandemic shifts because of that. But right now, there are a couple significant changes that have come up to the AMCAS application for the 2023-2024 cycle and moving forward. The first one is, many of you may be familiar with the disadvantage statement that they previously had, which served as an opportunity for students to identify any challenges that they faced growing up in college that may have impacted their opportunity to get to medical school in the same capacity as others. That has now been modified to the other impactful experiences essay. The character count is still the same for this. It's still 1,325 characters, but the difference is the phrasing now allows it to be a lot more inclusive, where more of you will be able to submit to this essay, whether it's related to anything that falls into the category of what would have been in the disadvantage statement before, or things outside of that, you can complete this. So if there's anything with familial challenges that impacted you growing up, anything with the community you grew up with, maybe you didn't have access to primary care, maybe your family didn't have insurance, or you lived in a rural community and had to drive hours to get care. Maybe you were in a low-income family growing up, or you had to work to support family, which impacted your academics. Maybe you had limited educational experiences. We've had students in the past that growing up didn't have access to books outside of school. So it was really difficult to learn the English language, which then oftentimes also comes as an indirect justification for potentially like a CARS score that may be a little lower, things like that. So also keep in mind, like anything with the MCAT, any barriers that you faced there, think about any challenges in life that could have led to a lower score on that capacity. And then I know a lot of times we'll work with reapplicants as well. And if you're a reapplicant, this can also serve as an opportunity to justify that as well. Because I know a lot of reapplicants, you know, life may have happened and impacted them in the midst of the cycle. They may not have been able to submit secondaries because something happened personally. It's not going to serve as a prompt for why are you reapplying, but again, that other impactful experience information you'll include could serve as a justification. So I actually think that this is a huge benefit for students because it's going to allow so many of you to complete this. Don't feel pressured to complete it as it is optional, but it is a great thing that you can take advantage of. And then the second big change is the social justice and advocacy experience type. So as you know, you will all be inputting experiences into the application for AMCAS, and they've now added a new type of experience that you can justify, which is the social justice and advocacy. And this really goes into any experience where you are advocating for others or serving disadvantaged populations. So you may be advocating for civil rights, you may be helping accessibility within the healthcare field, you may be advocating for vulnerable populations like children or those in the homeless population. So all that can get incorporated into this sector of the application. So while they do seem like minor changes, they are changes that can allow you to frame yourself and your experiences in ways that will create an even stronger application. So keep those in mind.
Yeah, that's what you're saying sounds like a testament to the fact that holistic review of applications is a thing, right? And it happens because the AAMC is opening, you know, the AMCATs is opening the door to see people as even more than just the usual set of extracurriculars or just fitting into the usual boxes. And that's really great because, you know, I know all of us here and at Jack Westin in general, we really do believe that the physician population should resemble the population that it serves. And these, like you said, these are pretty big changes, even if they seem small.
I think the essay, the impact, like disadvantaged going to impactful, is also really useful because I had a student once talk to me that like they felt like they couldn't put in something on the disadvantage thing because they felt like it had to be a socioeconomic or like due to a racial or ethnic background, and they didn't fit into a disadvantaged group there. But like their parent had a disability and where they weren't able to like get out of the house very often, and so they had to like give their siblings rides all the time and like make sure that like people got to the dentist and back and forth. And I'm like, oh, that's totally like a disadvantaged thing. But like for them, it became something like, I don't feel like that's the right thing to put in that. But like that's something to be aware of. The fact that they're opening that up now allows the writers, the students, to be a little bit more creative. And if there is a story that they want to tell that they think is important in portraying who they are as a student, like now they have the room to do that, which is a positive thing overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's giving students the freedom to kind of express who they are and what's led them to where they are today, a little bit outside the why medicine or the impact they had on an experience. So I think that's really special because not every school gives students that opportunity with a secondary, depending on the prompts that they provide. So this is a really unique experience. And like Phil, for a student like yours, they may not have previously fallen into the category of writing the disadvantage statement if there wasn't, let's say, a financial or access barrier. But that is completely a commitment that got in the way of other opportunities for them. And that also shows how they went above and beyond to care for others first and showing service in a different way. And just that commitment from early on to help others. So definitely worth taking advantage of, and really important that it's open to students in this way. We're excited about it.
And even with the just the social justice component, I think that's really interesting because a lot of times I know a lot of people who got involved in advocacy work, and that wouldn't have been something that would have normally been included in their application, kind of a clean cut way. And that takes so many forms. And as time continues to pass, advocacy, it's the number of ways that you can be an advocate is about as numerous as the ways that people need advocacy, right? If not more. And so that's a really great opportunity for students to explore, and might honestly even encourage people, who are thinking pretty early about their application, encouraging them to explore something that they may not have otherwise explored and get to do this thing, because now they can put it, but they may be held back because they felt like other parts of their application needed more work, more time put in them. And so I can imagine that also being a scenario where a student finds themselves.
Yeah. I think it's really cool that they added and changed that, because to be honest, I think most of those things that were social justice and advocacy, I think there probably was a place to put them in your application and your experiences and stuff. But I like that the AAMC is going out of its way to say, listen, we think these sorts of things are important, because I know that there are times when students are like, oh, I did a big thing protesting insurance costs or something like that. And they're like, I don't know if I want to advertise that, because that's kind of being angry at the healthcare industry, and I want to be a physician. I'm like, no, that's a good thing. Taking that time and effort to advocate on behalf of patients. And so I think just making it clearer that those sorts of things are good things by adjusting the categories, I think is big. I know, Nicole, you were talking about there's actually a bunch of different things, and those were the two biggest ones, in the changes in of the year, I guess. But what were some of the? You said that there were some other smaller ones when I was.
Yes, there's smaller ones. One of them falls into how you identify disciplinary action in the application. So those students that for some reason or another may have some sort of institutional challenges, now you'll identify if it was a conduct issue, an academic issue, or both. And oftentimes that, again, kind of goes into the holistic review a little bit more, so they have a greater understanding of what happened. And there are other spaces where we can explain that as well, but that's a big change with institutional access. They've now updated the labels for pronouns and gender identity to be a bit more inclusive than they previously were. And then there is an optional field now for prospective AAMC preview dates as well. So those are all different facets that are coming in. These two are the biggest changes that'll overall impact the way that the student is approaching their application. But those other changes are all leading to a more transparent application cycle, and again, more inclusivity and representation for all. So that's awesome.
Yeah. I like the idea of giving students, if there was a disciplinary action, giving students a place to tell their side of the story a little bit. Because I think that's useful. I feel like we got kind of a little bit, because all of this stuff is really cool and exciting for sure. Understand this is something all students should be really focused on this. But I want to kind of take a second and I want to sing Nicole's praises a little bit, because you guys know I'm a data nerd. I like numbers. I like hard data, right? I don't like feelings. I like numbers and equations. And that's why I love to teach the sciences all day, every day. But from that sort of data perspective, and I know this is probably going to scare some students and cause some sympathetic system activation, but every year, only 38% of students that apply to med school get in, which is a little bit more than 1 in 3 students get in. And that is scary, right? The fact that 62% of people who apply don't get in. I know that in our admissions department, the people who have worked with Nicole on their personal statements and secondaries and all of those things, we have a 94% acceptance rate. So 38% get in versus 94% get in. And that is a huge thing, and numbers don't lie. And that's why I'm was so excited to get Nicole on here. Just some advice and understanding that a little bit better, I think is is really, really useful. So Nicole, I don't know if you want to talk about those numbers at all, or maybe just tell like a little bit more about what the admissions department does.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I think one of the biggest parts to understand with admissions and just applying to med school overall is that there are so many students that apply each year, and committees, whether it's for the better or worse, have to do what they can to kind of narrow down candidates wherever they can, because there are just so many people applying that the only way to do it is to have processes filtering students out left and right. And that is where how you convey who you are in your application makes the biggest difference. And staying on top of things like timelines, having good relationships with your letter writers to have really strong letters, things like that. And that's where the admissions process comes in, and the admissions team here at Jack Westin. We are here to support students through all parts of the application process. We have different admissions pathways that students can join to guide students through the application process. And we're really here to meet students where they're at. So whether it's deciding what activities you need to add to make sure that your application is as well-rounded as possible, or having certain school goals and wanting to make sure that your application aligns with their missions, or whether it's just doing what you can to get into med school. Maybe your stats weren't the highest, or maybe you're an international applicant that needs to kind of go above and beyond with your experiences, with your stats, with your overall connection to medicine and your why. We're here to support you regardless of where you're at. And I think the foundation of it starts with understanding your why and what got you to connect to medicine. Because as much as you're talking about your experiences and what you did and trying to have yourself shine over other applicants, it's also always coming back to the root of what got you into this. A part of that is allowing your story to be reflected in your personal statement so that we can really see your passion, see the personal, professional, academic experiences that got you to where you are today. And then on the other front, that helps us understand how to navigate writing about your experiences. And, you know, one thing I love about our admissions program is that we're here to support students regardless of where they're at. We had a student in the past that was an athlete and had previously applied to med school on their own. And when he applied on his own, he didn't get in anywhere. And he was told that, you know, his frame of athleticism wasn't going to get him in. It was the wrong framework. It wasn't highlighting the right skills. And it was really hard for this student to hear. And he also came to us after feeling really defeated from other companies that had told him that he's not going to get it. And we saw skills in him that were going to translate over to becoming a good physician. He was an athlete and held leadership positions there, which can easily translate over to leadership in medicine. His collaboration with his team, learning how to take experiences that he had with physicians when he got injured and translating that over to why he wants to pursue a career in medicine. And then following our guidance overall too on pursuing additional experiences. Like this student pursued a service learning opportunity that allowed them to also get clinical experiences with an underserved population. And with all that, they were able to defeat the odds that everyone had told them, got 9 interviews and got into med school and is really happy where they're at right now. So those are the stories that I love to see, you know, helping students build their confidence and become the best version of themselves and the best applicants they can be. And, you know, we're here to help you all become future physicians. And while those numbers are low for national averages, I think that with our program, we really create a personalized experience for you and get to know who you are holistically and make sure that, you know, beyond the numbers, schools want to get to know who you are. And again, tackling every part of the application comes into that. One more thing I do want to highlight is letters, because I do help students all the time with deciding who their letter writers should be. And I cannot tell you how many admissions committee members say that their letters end up being like the big make or break at the end of the day, because these are third-party individuals that are giving a perspective on who you are. So it's also very important to make sure that you're investing effort on your end to make sure that you're building that good relationship, making sure that they really know the reasons why you're going to medical school and why you'll be a good candidate. What will allow you to be a fit? What qualities do you have? And that's where I share, like, don't be afraid to get to know your letter writers. Don't be afraid to get personal, like stay after school for office hours, stay after class, stay longer with your clinical experiences, get to know the physicians. I know people are busy, but these are the ways to allow yourself to excel in all areas. And again, that's where we come in, kind of making sure that you're highlighting yourself in all ways.
Yeah.
It's great that you guys, it's when you hear a number like 94% of people that work with Nicole's team get in, it's really easy to think like, oh, well, it's just people who are applying for the first time. But you sharing the story about the student who is reapplying just goes to show the strength of your team and what you guys can do. And I don't know about you, Phil, and I don't know about our listeners, but I think it would be really great to know a little bit about who makes up the team. It sounds like such a powerful group of people empowering students.
Yeah, definitely. So we have found that a wide variety of individuals joining together to support students works really well because everyone can contribute their expertise in leading the student to the best finish line for them based on whatever those personal goals are. So on our team, we have medical school residents, we have advisors that are advisors at universities or medical schools across the country, and we have individuals that are editors with really strong writing backgrounds, oftentimes with either master's degrees or even PhDs in things like literature and creative writing. And we find this to be really helpful because each one of these sectors of our admissions members are the most proficient that you can find in that area. So with writers, we find it best that the editors have this writing background because if you're, let's say, a physician, like physicians can absolutely look at applications and provide support. But in terms of being able to write a strong personal statement that captures the attention of the reader, well, who better to do that than someone that writes professionally? Like, it's like having an author behind the scenes for you on your side that's there to help convey your story and tell your autobiography. And I think that's an awesome facet of our admissions team that, our editors can all help you best creatively write and create impact using, again, their strong writing backgrounds. And with advisors, these individuals have worked with hundreds of students that are pre-meds overall that we're looking into getting into med school and understand the process, have seen strong applications, have seen applications that weren't the best, have built connections with med schools across the country and understand what it takes to get to that finish line. And then with the individuals that are residents on our team, well, they've been through the process. So they understand it on that front as well. So depending on the student, we pair you with different team members that we think would best be able to support you and your goals. But we believe that the team that we have created is the best out there in terms of making sure that your goals are met and that we will be able to properly convey everything, both in writing and guiding you so that it comes together.
No doubt.
Yeah. So I'm gonna set you up for an easy hit here with a softball question, Nicole, because I know the answer to this, but I just think students need to know this. Do you just do like MD schools?
We do not just do MD schools. We do MD schools. Thank you, Phil. We do DO schools as well. We help students with international schools. We help students with Canadian schools. We help Canadian and international students get into U.S. medical schools as well. So regardless of what your goal is for medicine, we are here to get you there.
Yeah. I know that you've done some stuff with like the Texas school system, which also is like a weird application system.
Yeah.
But we were just talking the other day about how he had a student get into, I think it was Dalhousie,
Yes.
which is a Canadian medical school. And Canadian medical schools tend to be, believe it or not, even more competitive than American MD schools just because there are fewer of them. And so like students who are applying to Canadian med schools have like extra things that they should be more aware of or or need to not worry about as much depending on kind of like that application stuff. And so I think it's really useful to be able to talk to somebody who knows a whole bunch about these things, like just what different systems, because there's like 4 main systems. There's the DO, the MD, the Canadian, and then the Texas school system, which for some reason is on its own. To be able to navigate all of these seamlessly is pretty tricky.
Yeah, definitely. And Canada is its own beast. Texas is its own beast too, but Canada is very complicated. And, whether you're in province for certain schools or out of province, the expectation for your stats changes. How you identify experiences and your personal statement are completely different there as well. The prompts they ask you are different. Just to give you like a frame of reference, for AMCAT schools within the US, you're identifying 15 experiences. For Canadian, like Ontario schools, you're including like 32 experiences, but you have like a seventh of the space to write about each one. So there are all these nuances that are different. Expectations with like CARs or GPA, things like that vary as well. And again, like Phil said, like we're here to meet you where you're at, regardless of which system you're applying into.
That's really interesting. So I feel like a Canadian applicant would want to prioritize a more diverse experience set. Like you want to do more experiences, even if it's less time at each one, because you want to like give lots of information, show the well-roundedness, which I don't think is a word, but we'll pretend it is. Like show how well-rounded you are versus like American MD. Like if you did like 20 different experiences, like you don't get to write about 5 of them. And you have to leave 5 off. And so it rewards more like deeper, but like narrower kind of focus, which is kind of interesting. I know you do lots of stuff kind of all across the gamut of what students need. And I don't know if anybody caught it, but when you said something about like helping students stay on timelines and things like that, I turned a little red and laughed to myself, because this is an area that I did not do super well in when I was applying. Like most of you guys know, I applied MD, PhD, which is a little bit of a weird process because most schools have like 1 or 2 like seats. And so it's even more competitive because I'm like, oh, there's like 2 people here. Like there's room for only 2 people at this entire school. And so I applied like a bunch of places, but I did not, and I think I did a good job on the MCAT. I did a great job on my personal statement, but I dropped the ball hard on secondaries, and I was very late with all of them. And my interview prep, I did not do well in. Luckily, I had a lot of interviews, because the first 5 schools I interviewed at, I didn't get into any of them. But the last 5 schools I interviewed at, I got into all of them. And so if I had only interviewed at 5 schools, then I would have been done. But it's just because I was not good at interviews. And the more interviews I did, the better I got. And I didn't practice interviews beforehand. And that's a big problem. So I think there's a lot of stuff that I think students don't think about. I know you guys do stuff with like choosing schools, like school selection. And it was so strange. I was talking to Nicole the other day, and I mentioned a school, and she's like, oh, they're having issues with accreditation. And I'm just like, how do you know that, right? Like that you just like this one random school all the way across the country that has a bachelor's MD combo a program, like you have these like details on that. And so I think somebody who sees kind of the big picture and understands like, oh, you should apply here, like maybe not this school, like this cycle, or maybe this school would actually be a better fit for you. I think that's really, really useful.
And do students get to ask you what they need help with? Like I can imagine, sometimes people, and yes, this is also an easier one, but I can imagine a lot of people saying, okay, well, I only need help with this part, or I think I need help with this. I'm not sure about needing help with that. Maybe I need help with all of it. How does that work with you guys?
Yeah, so we try to make sure that, like I said, we meet students where they're at. So first things first, whatever the student comes forward with as their presenting problem, we're of course going to dive into, because we want to make sure that that's going to get support. And we have a lot of students that come in knowing that, maybe their interview skills aren't the best. Maybe they're not the best writers. They know what they want to say, but they don't know how to convey it. So those are definitely some of the things that we keep in mind in the preliminary process. But we also try to make sure that we get a comprehensive view of all of our students. So once you join the program, we actually have an onboarding specialist that meets with our students to make sure that we have a sense of all your experiences, your grades, where you've been, what you've done, to make sure that you're presenting your most significant problem, but we may be able to also identify gaps or areas that we can help you improve. And we try to bring that whole picture together, again, to make sure that we're addressing what you need, but also what we think that you need to make sure that this is going to lead to the best application.
It's really great because sometimes we know what our weaker areas are and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we need that help and that kind of triaging. And you guys help not just support in that aspect, in that regard, but also kind of diagnose what areas need a little bit more TLC, which is really fantastic. I can imagine another area that a lot of students might need some TLC with is figuring out scholarships, because like you guys mentioned, they exist.
Yeah, they're a thing.
Scholarships are a thing. And I mean, as both of you know, I'm sure medical school is very expensive. Students leave with a lot of debt. And, I commend you. I know that leaving, you'll be making a good amount of money. But at the same time, there's a lot that you'll have to be paying back. And that's why we believe in the power of scholarships, both merit-based scholarships and scholarships that you can apply into to be able to get full coverage. We just had a student get the 20th Century Scholarship or Penn, which is a full ride. So they're going to be covered. No need to worry about finances the next 4 years, which is awesome. We've had a student get that to UT Southwestern as well within the Texas system. We've helped students earn independent scholarships that led to full rides as well. Some of them based on service, some of them based on, again, holistic review. And actually, one of the most notable scholarships that we've had that also plugs one of our other services is the admissions committee. So here at Jack Westin, we have an admissions committee that is a committee of physicians that have previously or currently serve on admissions committees at med schools across the country. And they review your application holistically and provide a score of where you stand based on a percentile ranking, suggestions to improve your primary application before submitting, strengths and weaknesses that they identify. And actually, for one of our past applicants, the committee actually recommended that the student apply to the Knight Hennessy Scholarship, which the student actually ended up getting and is now at Stanford full ride, which is absolutely amazing. And that's where our services, again, kind of come full circle, and being able to also guide students in ways that they might have not even thought they can get to themselves. The student never would have thought of applying to this scholarship on their own. And now they get to move forward with their next goal, not thinking about debt. So it's awesome. And
yeah,
incredible.
That is so huge. I just want to pause, and because I remember hearing about these stories, like the student, like I think we just heard about the student who got the full ride at Penn like a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And I remember being like super excited. I'm like, oh, I think that's like the third full ride of the last year that we've been able to help students get. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And like it's this big, right? Like, and that's hundreds of thousands of dollars if you don't think about the interest. If you think about the interest, all of a sudden, like a couple $100,000 becomes like $400,000 or $500,000 by the time a lot of positions pay it off. Like I think a lot of students think, oh, as soon as you finish med school, you get to start paying it off because you'll be making tons of money. But like in residency, you don't make a ton of money. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine when he started residency. He's like, oh, I'm making $40,000 a year. And I'm like, that's not a lot. And he's like, well, that's a $90,000 a year raise off of last year. Because last year I was paying $50,000 and this year I'm making 40. And I'm like, well, that's a great way to look at that. And so being able to kind of like make those sort of adjustments where you can move into your residency and not be worrying about like, oh, it's like $15,000 or $20,000 of interest in a year. They like, oh no, there's no interest building up. And that's something that is big. And I know there are some physicians I know who have been influenced by that debt when they're thinking about what residencies to do. Because like if you want to do like a multiple specialty, or if you want to do like a hyper specific thing like neurosurgery, all of a sudden you're in residency for a whole lot longer, and that interest keeps building. And I know that can be painful for students. So if there's ways that we can help students with that, like I said, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and like being able to just like help a student get that makes me feel amazing, because I know what a difference that can be for just anybody.
Absolutely. The acceptance itself is very exciting, and knowing that they're making it to that next point. But when you can also get paid basically to go to school and not have to worry about those hundreds of thousands of dollars, like that's just a cherry on top that you can't put a price on.
And the story of that you shared with the student applying after working with your AdCom, it hits a little close to home, because I actually didn't apply, or wasn't planning on applying to a number of the schools that I ultimately applied to, including here at HMS. That was not on my list of places I was going to apply to. And it was only after I had a mentor basically push me and say, you are applying to these schools, and in kind words, that I ultimately did. And I wouldn't be here today in kind of multiple routes, both from high school to undergrad and then undergrad to medical school, if it hadn't been for that mentorship, for someone taking a look at just where I was at and seeing beyond what I could see. Because a lot of times we have these perceptions of ourselves and kind of where we can make it and what we should be aiming for and reaching for, and they're not always 100% accurate. And so this idea that you shared with, having another set of, what it sounds like a lot of it is having another set of eyes to kind of help guide you and give you the best chance of success, even if that means somewhere that you weren't initially planning on applying to. And it opens a lot of doors, which is truly incredible. And so I hear that, and I got especially excited about that, just because it, that kind of mentorship and nudging people is something that I hold very dear.
I love that, Azai. And I mean, that's a true testament to how important it is to have someone on your side that can advocate for you. Yeah. As much as, we want to have our students advocating for patients and advocating for other people, it's also important to make sure that you have someone there advocating for you, because it's so easy to get lost in the process and forget the details. And sometimes you don't realize how much you're capable of until an outsider looks at it the way they did for you. And as I can say, hey, like, you're worth it and you can do it. And you can't it's not just getting into med school. You can get into this med school that's so much higher than what you would have thought for yourself. And it gives you the confidence to move forward. So I appreciate that contribution as well, because Azai, you're like a living testament to it.
Yeah.
Where were you when I was applying? It would have made my life so much easier and taken so much stress off.
I was thinking the same thing. Like, there's some med schools that I interviewed, and I'm like, oh, like I really should have gotten some help with interview prep or with secondaries before I did that. And like, those are things that would have made a big difference for me. But I do want to kind of take a second. Whenever I tell students about this, of like, we can help students get full rides and get into these hard to get into schools like Stanford, like a full ride to Stanford. That's amazing.
Wild.
Yeah. I know that a lot of times, like, the first response from students is like, oh, they must have had a 526, right? And like a 4.0 GPA and won a Nobel Prize, right? But I know that, like, there are some occasions of like, no, we're like really excited for this student, because there's a lot of stuff that with this holistic review, that having a really, really good personal statement and having like really good interview skills and secondaries and very good letters of recommendation, there are things you can do to make your letters better. Like, it isn't all on the letter writer. So there are some steps that you should be taking. And I know you talk about that, Nicole, with students in the process. But I was wondering if you had any just like stories of students that weren't in the 520s getting into med school and being able to become a physician, which is their dream.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even that student that got into Stanford, like, of course, amazing experiences overall, but that student was at a 516. And on top of Stanford, they also got into Harvard and Yale. So you don't need the 520 and up. You just got to make sure that the way you're conveying yourself allows you to highlight your skills. We had another student that got into UCSD in California with a 508, and they actually applied as an out-of-state resident.
Wow.
Which is not easy to get into.
I was going to say, I didn't get an interview at any California schools. So the fact that they interviewed from out of state is amazing to me.
Yeah, it's very rough. We had another student that got into UCLA with a 506, also out of state student. And that's where, like, with that student, we had encouraged them to kind of highlight community involvement, largely because they had had some disadvantaged opportunities growing up that impacted them. And they had had really good clinical experiences and research experiences. But this is one thing that we also knew a lot of the schools they wanted to apply to highlighted that community involvement. And this is where advocacy comes in as a huge new category for experiences, bringing it back full circle. But this student ended up pursuing AmeriCorps, serving underserved populations in that capacity, giving back, getting experiences with populations that they hadn't previously worked with. And that was one of the biggest experiences that were highlighted in their interview at UCLA, which was huge. We've also had a Canadian student get into UCLA as well. So I guess in some weird way, we've done a good job tailoring towards some of the California schools. But it's been an amazing journey to see. We've also helped DO students get into med schools with like 497. So there are students all across the board. And again, a big part of that is, at least once you're meeting some of the minimums to at least be considered by schools, make sure that the way you're conveying yourself allows them to see you beyond the numbers.
Yeah. I think there's such a problem, and this is something that, you know, I kind of talked about a while ago, just the numbers side of things. There are more like qualified applicants than there are spots available in med schools. And so I think that a lot of times applicants are just they're in this mindset of like, as long as I don't say the wrong thing. And so they tend to be very kind of careful, and like, if they'll like oscillate, like, I probably shouldn't include this or shouldn't include that. Like, it might be on the fence. And so what happens is their application all of a sudden comes out just kind of bland and like, oh, I don't really know anything about you. In your fear of saying something that you thought would like make me reject you, you haven't said anything interesting about why you would be a great physician. And I think just like understanding that a little bit better, understanding what, and maybe a better way to phrase this is how to highlight certain things. There's a lot of times, as I know that we've talked about this in the past, when students are like, oh, should I write about this in my personal statement? It's like, yeah, but you got to be careful about the way you approach it, but you definitely should. But just, you know, kind of like going through that process is something that can be a little bit tricky, and that's why the guidance is so helpful. I know you focused on California schools, but if students don't know, I don't know what it is about California schools. They are very competitive.
Yeah.
Like I interviewed at like the Harvard MIT combo MD PhD program. I like interviewed at a bunch of Ivy League stuff, and I didn't even get like an interview at any of the California schools, any of them, and I applied to all of them. And so I'm just like, California, like they won't take anyone. So the fact that you had students getting in with 504s and 506s is huge. And maybe that also, in my mind, it's like, oh, the things that I think were strongest on my application were my MCAT score and like, you know, a lot of my research background, but I didn't have a lot of really strong social and things like that, because I was like researcher, right? I'm a scientist at heart. And so like maybe I was just hitting and focusing on the wrong things. And I think that there are some things that I could have maybe tweaked in my application, even with a worse MCAT score and less research experience, that maybe all of a sudden they would have been a little bit more interested.
Yeah. And I think with that too, it's huge to apply to the right schools that will value the experiences that you have as well. You know, like if you have that score like above 520 and you're applying to a lot of like top 10, top 20 schools, and you have a ton of clinical, ton of research experience, for those schools, yes, it may be the correct application. But for, let's say, some of the UCs that still value all that, but also really want to see diversity, advocacy, community involvement, seeing your desire to create change in the field of medicine, those are all components that are huge and really get thrown into the process as well. So it's making sure you know where you're applying and what the schools that you're applying to want. And on the note in California schools too, I know I highlighted a few that got in, and we've also seen the madness with it as well, though. Like, students that are in state that apply and get into Harvard, but don't apply, but don't get into the California schools. So it's definitely tough and tricky, and a gamut that we're always moving toward learning to navigate, but it is possible. And that's one of the things that we're happy to see. And I know as I wanted to chime in, but one other thing I wanted to quickly throw in is to also keep in mind that your application is different from your friends' applications and from everyone around you. So just because you're applying to the same schools or maybe had similar experiences doesn't mean the way that it's being conveyed is the same as well. And one person's result will not necessarily lead to the same result for you. So make sure you are treating your application as its own entity. And that's where it's also important to have people on your side, because that can help kind of create a little bit of that unbiased perspective as well.
There's so many pearls of wisdom in what y'all have mentioned and what you're sharing, Nicole. And I think that's a testament to all of the hard work that you put into getting students where they need to be. And we've been talking a lot about the different things that, you guys, the admissions team can help with. And I think it's also worth noting that for students that have more financial difficulty, even then the admissions team will help work with you to figure out, okay, what is it that you need and how do we make that happen in a way that's financially feasible? And so a lot of times people will shy away from getting help, from doing, and we see this even in the course, like they'll hesitate, they'll wait for a while, and then they'll come back and say, okay, I need help, but now they need even more help than if they had reached out sooner. So I, make a meeting with an academic advisor, different than the admissions team, and they can get you connected, or directly on the website, you can get connected with the admissions team. But there's just something about having people in your corner who can help guide you. And as simple as picking out the schools, like you mentioned, Nicole, is huge, because the rest of your application will the way that you tailor that will depend on where you're applying. And so there's just so much there that I think is really easy to overlook, all of the small details that go into a months, if not over a year-long process for some students in, from deciding where they're going to apply to doing all the prep work, getting all the pieces together, getting letters, filling out the application, the secondaries, the interview, and you guys are really there for all of that. And that is absolutely amazing.
Yeah. And I know that we talked about, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about like paid products, and Azai and I really love doing whatever we can to kind of like lower barriers. But like, as Nicole mentioned, a lot of the people on the admissions committees are physicians. Like, we have teams of physicians looking at things. And so the admission stuff is not a thing that, like, I really wish we could be like, oh, it's free and we'll do it for free. You can talk to an advisor for free, and that costs nothing. And they will talk to you about like, what are the game plans that you should be thinking about, and like how to kind of like structure, get advice for like different resources and things like that. But the admission side of things, like if you can get into med school a year earlier, then you become a physician a year earlier, then you have a full year of physician income and what me and my friends used to call the mythical doctor money. Like we hear it's out there somewhere, like one day we'll have this mythical doctor money. But not only that, but I'm thinking about like that student that we helped like get into Stanford, which is amazing, but also like full ride scholarship. And so, like what they paid to get that help was a tiny, tiny fraction of what we were able to help them achieve with that scholarship. And so, I don't want to like hide that the admissions process is like something that is like, there is a financial side to it. But we do try to keep it as low as we can. And it's something that's really important to us, is just kind of like lowering those barriers. But like in the end, I know, like I said, 94% of the students who go through it get in versus 38 in the regular population. So I think for the vast majority of students, this is a really good idea to maybe just kind of test out, like get some advice on maybe some, like, there's all sorts of little things we can do, like school selection or scholarships or secondaries or interview skills. Personal statements are huge.
Yeah.
I know that there's like 2 or 3 things that I should have gotten help with. I think I was fine on the other ones, but like these 2 things, like I needed help with. And school selection might have been a third one that I should have paid a little bit more attention to. But it's something that's always super exciting. And Nicole, I don't know if you have anything else that you wanna talk about. I know it's kind of like we're in that. I know, like Nicole, you used the term anxiety season before, for talking about like, oh, this is crunch time for a lot of students. So I don't know if you have any other just general advice for students.
Yeah, I mean, with applications just approaching at this time, I think, like Phil said, it's anxiety season. But make sure you know, too, that you're putting the best application out there that you can. And to make sure that what you convey about yourself is what really stands out to you about why you want to be a physician. Because if you feel confident in what you're expressing, schools will feel that as well. And always keep in mind your why as you're reading through your personal statement, your experiences. Make sure that your connection to medicine is clear. I like to say that the personal statement is a place to identify why you're pursuing a career in medicine. And then the experiences are a really good place to identify how you're contributing. So keeping in mind that differentiation as well as you're explaining your experiences, identifying your time with patients. Make sure that you have clinical experience in there, you have some research experience in there, you've interacted with physicians to some capacity to be able to show your understanding of what a physician does as you're showing your passion for this field and your interest. And always try to maintain a positive approach to it as well, even if there are negative challenges that got you to pursue this field. Really focus on what you got out of it that's now going to make you a better physician, as opposed to what happened that caused problems for you. I think is a huge part of it as well. And always being able to create meaning out of something and carrying that meaning into how it'll make you a better physician in the future.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nicole, and our listeners, for sure. Thank you. And for anyone who heard last week's episode, yes, maybe it's anxiety season, but take a deep breath.
Yep.
Hold it. If you're like Phil, or if it's, if you're more like me, just deeper breath in, deeper breath out, and we can work through this together.
Yeah. I do also want to do one last plug. If any of you guys want to learn more about the admission side of things, note that Nicole also does free trial sessions, like free sessions weekly to talk to students about the admissions process. And I know that you have a bunch of different presentations, Nicole, and so like it changes sometimes week to week. So whether you like want to find out a little bit more about like personal statements and how to approach that, or like the overall interview process, definitely check in. Like Jack Westin, it's free. It's free. Being able to go to a live class and pick the brain of Nicole, and hear like from her expertise, because really I think it is unrivaled when it comes to the admissions side of things. Like I said, like I'm constantly amazed when I'm talking to Nicole. I'm like, how did you know that about this one med school? And she's like, well, I looked into it recently. There was a student that was interested in going there, so I did some research. And I'm like, that's so great to have somebody who cares so much about students. So yeah, think that's it. Welcome to the world of admissions. Hopefully you have been in this process if you're working on your application now. But note that it's never too late to start. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us here at Jack Westin.